Hi, everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join us today for the webinar. Today, we are proud to launch our essential new report, Understanding Carbon, written collaboratively with the change agency Volans. Carbon is more than just the new black. It is essential to tackle climate change. And today, Positive Luxury's co-founder and CEO Diana Verde Nieto will be joined by experts in various fields to explore the topic further. Louise Kjellerup Roper, CEO of Volans, Pauline Op de Beeck, Business Development Manager for the UK and Europe at the Carbon Trust, Tim Field, founder of the Agricology project, and Dale Vince, founder of Ecotricity and Skydiamond. Before we start, I just want to remind you that this webinar will be 45 minutes, including 15 minutes of Q&A at the end, so you can submit your questions anytime through the Q&A box for the panel. Over to you, Diana.
Thank you so much, Claudia, and good afternoon, everybody. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar. Thank you, first and foremost, for taking time to do this with us. I'd like to start to direct my first question to Louise. Like Claudia said, we just launched a report this morning, co-author with Volans. Volans is a change agency. They are launching this week the Green Swan Observatory, which is a fantastic, I would call it not just think tank, but act tank. They don't think, they do action, which is what I love by Louise, John Elkington and their team. So Louise, tell us a little bit more about, why carbon is so important in the climate change conversation, and why is it, or is it the North Star?
Thank you, Diana. First of all, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to work with you on the report and to be in such nice company here to discuss this. And we're talking about first, why is carbon important? And when I first thought about that, I was like, well, there would be no life without carbon. But again, that's about where my limit stops. I'm not a chemist. So my focus is on business, I guess, and why carbon, and in particular carbon emissions, are important. And actually I would say essential to every business leadership today if they want to be successful to address it right now. And in the last couple of days, I came across a quote from a VC that said, our general view is that climate is eating the world. And that's a play on a quote from Mark Andreessen, the American entrepreneur, who about 10, 12 years ago said, software is eating the world. The analogy being that carbon is as important to business world today as software and digital was 10, 20 years ago. And any company that didn't understand the implications of digital for their business 10, 20 years ago has almost certainly had a terrible decade, if they're even have survived this time. And the same is going to be true for companies that don't understand the implications of carbon for their business right now. And I think most people know we're in this short space of time in which we have to solve this, but and really 2030 is when it burns. But most of us still seem to rely on governments to deal with it. So I kind of wanted, if it's okay, just to chat through how and why it's going to impact companies in general. The first one, and again, a lot of this is in the briefing paper we did, is on the fact that investors and finance providers are setting really quite radical net zero commitments. And just a couple of weeks ago, the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero, 160 finance institutions that are responsible for more than $70 billion worth of assets, committed to using those to build a global net zero emissions economy and live up to the Paris Agreement. Okay, but that pressure of that commitment, and they still don't know exactly how they're going to do it, but that pressure is going to filter down really quickly to the companies they invest in and lend to. So I guess for a business, if you're not acting on carbon and the emissions you have, you're going to find it very difficult and expensive, if not impossible, to get any credit line. And so that, I think, is enough reason to put it at the top of a board list, I guess. And added to that, then you've got other groups, like consumer expectations are rising. It's only a year and a half, I think, ago that the youth, including my children, were out on the street striking, and and pushing for us to act on climate change and carbon emissions, but now it's tipped into the mainstream for sure. And every survey I've seen, most of the companies we work with, sort of in advisory work, customers are increasingly caring about that crisis, and they will choose and have the ability now with apps and carbon calculators and so on to not buy from you if you don't act. So, you know, 1, your investors, 2, your customers, 3, your employees. Again, if you want to attract and motivate proper talent that you need for a successful business, you need to act. And I would say not just on carbon, but also on diversity, inclusion, social justice. I know you agree with me, Diana, on that, but it's really, really important to have a plan for this. And then not insignificantly, regulations and taxes. Governments all over the world have already committed to net zero commitments. In the UK, they've been quite aggressive about it. And sooner rather than later, there will be policies and regulation, both sticks and carrots. So favorable grants and conditions if you do the right thing, and extra taxes and penalties if you don't. Here in the UK, I've been involved with, through the Bankers for Net Zero Alliance, where we've been looking at what's the regulation needed right now to decarbonize small and medium enterprises. So they will be both hit with that, but also offered incentives to go in that direction. And similarly with the built environment. And then, yeah, so Porsche.
No, I was going to say thank you. And no, that's cool. I will come back to you. But yeah, absolutely. No. Not just the UK, but also in Europe. I mean, the European Parliament is super active into pushing legislation, soft legislation right now. And in the US, I mean, we have seen so much change of the legislation, probably the most active that the US government has been in years. So this is actually really great news, but we need incentives.
Yeah, but it's coming at all of us, right? It's not going to stay at that level.
No, absolutely. I'd like to draw my attention to Pauline. I mean, Pauline, you work in the Carbon Trust. You know, kind of obviously carbon is not sustainability, is one bit of it, but it's not it. And you need much more to do sustainability than just measuring your footprint. But tell us, why measuring your carbon footprint is a great start and is actually massively important.
Yeah, so first of all, thanks for having me. But yeah, as Louise mentioned, carbon is an indicator that a lot of stakeholders are using to measure the extent to which a business is considering its impact on the environment. And you see, particularly in this sector, actually, a lot of loans tied to that. So when a luxury house or any type of brand has set a carbon reduction target, often their credit lines are then attached to achieving that target, and they get, you know, favorable outcomes when they reduce along the targets they've set. So that's why it's very important to kind of understand what your impact is, because I think of, you know, many of the environmental indicators, carbon is probably the one that is the easiest to measure. And there are, you know, very standardized approaches for that. So having those measurements obviously, you know, helps you understand what your impact is. So that's, you know, when you're looking at calculating a baseline footprint, but then ultimately that baseline footprint then helps you understand, okay, you know, what are the hotspots within that? What do we need to reduce? What can we reduce? And that's where you start thinking about setting those targets. So when it comes to footprinting, I say it's an established practice, and it is, but it's not easy. So if we're looking at, you know, your own operations, that is relatively easy. We're thinking, you know, maybe some manufacturing sites, stores, offices, that kind of thing. This is all data you have to hand. It's essentially the bills you pay for the energy you procure. And that's, you know, relatively straightforward to gather. But for most companies, especially in, you know, the retail luxury sector, that makes a very, very small proportion of the actual carbon impact of a company, usually less than 10%. And that 90% really comes from the entire value chain. So that's when you're looking at all of those upstream emissions, you know, all the way from the harvesting of the raw material down to the processing of that material, assembling that material into a product, then, you know, the transportation to sell it, but also the customer use. So, you know, what is the customer care for this garment? Is it, you know, frequently washed, dry cleaned, etc.? It sounds silly, but that actually can end up being quite a big impact of the good that you're selling. And then, of course, there's the end of life. You know, how does the customer dispose of that? Are there resale options, or you know, does it kind of end up in landfill? So it's this entire kind of value chain that you need to footprint to understand what the actual impact your business has as it relates to carbon. And as I said, you know, there are standard methodologies that you calculate that with. There's industry bodies that kind of help you source the correct what's called emission factors to kind of attribute the correct kind of carbon intensity associated with the material or activity you might be footprinting. But yes, that kind of data collection piece is obviously quite difficult because you're looking at all of these upstream elements that, you know, you don't necessarily have direct control over. And I hope I haven't made it sound too scary, but certainly the scariness of it or the complexity of it is not a reason not to do it. And these footprints, you know, are inherently imperfect because of, you know, the lack of primary data. So don't think of it like financial reporting, which obviously has to be to the letter correct. It's not quite an exact science yet, but with a lot of, you know, secondary data, you know, standard product footprints, for example, that already exist for certain materials, you can begin to understand what the likely hotspots are in your business. And it's absolutely, you know, important to take that first step so that you can get at least a high level picture of what your impact is to then start to reduce it. Because without that picture, you know, you really don't know where to focus your energies on. And yeah, there are obviously the usual suspects in terms of what has the biggest carbon impact, but we do often find that our clients are sometimes a bit surprised by, you know, what stage of the value chain or what particular material is actually the most impactful from a carbon perspective. So yeah, I would just urge any companies that haven't done that yet to kind of, yeah, seek out a partner or do it in-house, but it's really important to get that first look.
Thank you so much, Pauline. And the answer is not just offset. That is not the answer. Is understand where you are first, reduce through absolute reductions. And when you've done that, then offset, and then offset into your best energy, perhaps building capacity, not just plant trees. And if all of this is kind of sound kind of very difficult, do download the report. I put it on the chat. And this is actually carbon made super easy for anybody that might not be a sustainability expert. But this is, yeah, Carbon for Dummies, easy to understand. I'd like to go to Tim because we talked about, okay, what is it? What is important? And then what do we do to actually understand what is the carbon impact? And then, I mean, I am very honored to have also Tim and Dale in this panel because most businesses are either agricultural business or mining businesses. Even if you are a fashion brand or a jewelry brand, that is really where at the core of your business, what is the core of your business? And everything is kind of, it starts with the soil. So I'd like to go to Tim because, you know, what is the role of carbon and carbon sequestration in order to actually take this 1.5 degrees down? Because this is what we're talking about. We're talking about climate solutions and how carbon is one of those measurements that it will allow us to measure how we can actually create innovation or innovation solutions within the value chain in order to actually reduce these targets to 2030, which is 1.5 degrees out of the atmosphere, ideally, and take some carbon out. So Tim, over to you. This is not complex, so I'm sure you can make it easy in 4 minutes.
Yeah, no problems at all. So yeah, why soil? Why soil part of this conversation? And you mentioned there mining and agriculture, particularly agriculture and soil has that intrinsic link, but unfortunately been mining all that soil carbon for millennia actually, but really intensively over the last 70 odd years with the industrialization of agriculture. And soil carbon is incredibly important, not just as a pool of carbon in the soil, but also in terms of water quality and flooding management and the nutrition of your food, because carbon is the food of the life in the soil as well as the product of the soil. And then intrinsically biodiversity as well. So food security is hugely important in this conversation with carbon and soil carbon. And soils have a huge role to play in sequestration because over the last 70 years, as I say, we've been taking it out of the soils, putting it into the atmosphere. Now, with regenerative agriculture or agroecology or conservation agriculture, whatever you want to call it, progressive agriculture takes atmospheric carbon dioxide and pulls it down through photosynthesis and puts it back in the soil. And that it actually encourages health in the soil. So that's the why. That's why we're trying to talk about soil carbon. How we do it, agroecology and regenerative agriculture is about using natural systems. So getting things like grass, which I've got here, to photosynthesize, pull that carbon down and create healthy soil through roots, rather than just have bare soil, which is cultivated years after years after years, and actually protect that soil with a blanket. Now, I use grass as an example because grass is probably the most effective way of pulling in an agricultural system, pulling carbon out and putting it in the soil. But of course, we have trees as well. We know carbon is sequestered very well in trees, and it's a long life cycle embedded in that carbon, embedded in that tree. It's wonderful. So why not integrate carbon pulling trees into your lives, into your agricultural system as well? So we have things like agroforestry. So there's all these different mechanisms, reducing your cultivations to stop that carbon in the soil oxidizing and going back up into the air again. And then even integrating livestock, but the right kind of livestock, because what we don't want to be doing is feeding livestock loads of grain, which then belch and fart and stick it back up in the atmosphere. It has a role to play in utilizing the land and rebuilding that soil fertility and carbon embedded. So there's a shift that we need to take on. Now, the mechanisms for that aren't just the goodwill of the farmers, because unfortunately they are slow to change if there's no buck in it. And so the carbon market mechanism is fantastic. The challenge with that, you can't see carbon in the soil. So we're talking in terms of measuring that accurately. You can see a tree that's planted, you can see it from space. But thankfully, I'm very happy to say I'm part of a project which is really understanding soil carbon and embedded in soils and how deep you're going. So 30 centimeters down. You can actually now measure that from space, albeit quite roughly, but you can. So we can change our processes, we can verify it, and then we can check that we're not just going to go and plow that all up and stick it back up in the atmosphere again. It's complicated. I'm not going to try and wrap it up in 4 minutes, but there are means and ways of doing it. So very exciting times for agriculture, that is for certain.
Thank you so much, Tim. And if you're asking yourself, why is this relevant to me if I have a fashion brand? It's because basically a lot of the products that you have, like cotton, not just fashion, also alcohol or any brands that, you have raw materials coming from the soil. This is why it's so important to start having relationship with your suppliers, not just tier 1, but tier 2, tier 3, all the way to the farm, because this is where really we can make all the difference in order to actually get to these absolute reductions in order to meet our 2050 and 2030 targets. But this is not it. Also, innovation is massively, massively important. And I'd like to hand the floor over to Dale, because Dale has been a disruptor for a long time, most famous by being the founder of Ecotricity and now Skydiamonds. So over to you, Dale. I mean, what is Skydiamonds and why, and why this innovation is so important? So yeah, over to you.
Cool, thank you. Skydiamonds is an idea I had maybe 10 years ago, and I was thinking about how we take carbon out of the atmosphere. And I realized that was only half the job. We had to lock it up into a permanent form. It was a logical next thought that diamonds are the most enduring form of carbon that we know of. And I thought, wouldn't it be amazing to be able to lock up atmospheric carbon into diamonds? It took us about 7 years of R&D to get there, to create the process. But what I love about it is that it's a thoroughly 21st century process. The air that we put back into the atmosphere when we're finished with it is cleaner than the air that we take out. Our entire ingredient list is the wind, the sun, rain, and atmospheric carbon. We're not carbon neutral. We're not low carbon. We're carbon negative. And I think it's a first in industrial processes. I also think it's really important because all of the work that I do is about promoting green living, and a really key message, the only way really that we're going to get the mass of people on board with this is that it's not about giving stuff up. We can still have the things we like to have and do the things we like to do. We just have to do them differently. In this case, we can have diamonds. We like to call it bling without the sting, because we make them in such a benign fashion. Mining the sky is just a wonderfully evocative way to create diamonds, something that people like to have, made from something that we have too much of.
Thank you very much. And I'm also Del, you have commissioned a report about, we have 3 types of diamonds. There are more, but you know, you have natural diamonds, you have lab-grown diamonds, and now you have sky diamonds. So if you don't mind, if you can put on the chat this really very interesting report that you have commissioned with Imperial College, so everybody can actually download, it will be much appreciated. So, I mean, I'm sure that you guys are about to ask a lot of questions in the Q&A chat. So I would like to start with the last question for you all, which is, okay, companies right now are either starting in the journey of understanding the carbon impact, or perhaps already quite advanced in this journey. But the reality is that we need speed. So which piece of advice would you give companies that really want to start or continue this low carbon economy, really, at speed? And perhaps I'd like to start with Del, if I may.
Yeah, my advice to people normally is look first at 3 things: energy, transport, and food. It's how you power yourself, how you travel, and what you eat. 80% of most people or organizations' carbon footprint is found in those 3 things. Of course, there are lots of details around the edges, and it gets complicated when you think about supply chains, scope 2 and 3 emissions, or scope 3, in fact, in particular. But I like to try and keep it simple and say, start there, start with the big targets, you know, the energy you buy, the way you travel, and the food that you serve, if you serve food, or the food that you eat as a person. I think these are really important. And there was earlier a chat about the role of land, and it's so crucial. The thing I just want to lob into that part of the discussion is that if we stop eating animals, we free up 75% of all farmland globally. We can give that back to nature, we can rewild the planet, and at the same time absorb an incredible amount of carbon.
Thank you very much. Pauline, over to you.
Yeah, so I guess the big question is time and how fast. So obviously, you know, most companies will have some low-hanging fruits, which they can deal with quite easily. Whether you have done that or have not, that's definitely the first place to go. But that second piece is innovation, as Dale was speaking about. It's about, you know, doing the things we already do, but doing them quite differently. So I think, you know, seeking out innovators that you can partner with to pilot things, and to, you know, make the fabulous products you already have even more exciting and interesting. And at the end of the day, it's a creative challenge. It has always been in the sector, but dealing with carbon is, you know, another element to that creative challenge. And I think the innovation and collaboration go hand in hand with that. And, you know, this is a systems problem, and it's not something that you can each solve on your own. So also to, you know, reach out to your peers. What are they doing? How are they solving this? And really kind of growing that pre-competitive space, because ultimately, you know, what if we work together, we can get there a lot quicker.
Thank you very much. Tim, what would be your advice?
Well, I think understanding the supply chain is so important, and I don't think any one business can fully understand their entire supply chain to the degree that we'd hope to. So it's about how we collaborate, as Pauline mentions there, and look for the right organisations to be able to sort of endorse or give us a bit of transparency up and down the supply chain. So certification schemes are a great place to start, and obviously, you know, Positive Luxury's been making great strides in this area, and in agriculture we've been working on a global farm metric as well, which brings together all of the certification schemes and all of the different ways of measuring sustainability and productivity and inputs and everything else on farmland, to try and harmonize the way we capture that data, so that people, without having to have a PhD in carbon or in biodiversity or in energy management or whatever else, can have a bit more of a glance up and down their supply chain to understand how it's performing. So I think it's important to get third-party endorsement and third-party to look at what's going on.
Thank you very much, Tim. Louise, over to you. What would be your advice?
So it's hard to go last in this because I feel like a lot of good stuff has been said. So I'll repeat some of it and then add a little bit, hopefully. There's this thing about prioritizing and keeping it super simple. And that will be really different depending on if you're a micro-sized business or a bigger business and which sector you're in. Of course, huge. There's the collaboration and there's the innovation, because everything is going to change. And that leads me back to what are the principles you're trying to run your business by and trying to do this by. And I think having a little bit of clarity around that, so that every employee, whether you're small or large, has an idea of the decisions to be made. When you choose a transport company, or when you choose a supplier, having some very, very simple principles that you can go with, that anybody can deal within the organization is, I think, is key. But everything that's been said, that find collaborators, find advice, keep it darn simple, and act, because we could really easily be overwhelmed right now by all the numbers and everything you have to do. You know, we're a very small company. We did, you know, carbon footprinting is really not easy because we're renting office space in London. But again, ask the questions, keep talking about it, keep talking about the principles that you want to run your business by, and that should be actually not even net zero, but beyond net zero, as Dale said earlier.
That's brilliant. I mean, thank you so much. And we have a lot of questions coming up, so I hope you guys are ready. And I will ask the question, and whoever would like to answer will be great, unless they're specifically directed to one of you, which I will direct the question from the chat. So as a very small business, how can I have the most impact in terms of measuring and reducing my carbon? I don't know who would like to answer that. Probably Pauline.
Yes, so there are some, free calculators that you can use online. Those do tend to be focused on kind of own operations, because that's the simplest to calculate. But in terms of kind of looking at your products, I would just urge you to look at, what raw materials do you use? Are there, publicly available studies that explain what the impacts of those raw materials are, and maybe give advice on how that can be reduced? Because, yeah, I do understand as a small business, you obviously, not everyone can engage a large consultancy to do that end-to-end footprint, but there is luckily, a lot of free resources out there that can help you understand what that impact is and give you, the direction to then reduce it.
Thank you so much, Pauline. What happens after we already measure our carbon footprint as Beatrice? What are the best accurate steps a manufacturer company can do to reduce? So what are the next accurate steps of a manufacturing company can do to reduce? I don't know who would like to take that.
Yes, so one thing you could do is an energy audit. It's not very sexy, but it is a good way to understand, to what extent are your processes operating at maximum efficiency? Are there, investments you can make those processes more efficient? Communicating the footprint is a great thing as well, and being able to track that year on year and communicating that to your customers, because at the end of the day, brands need this information from their manufacturers to make their footprints more accurate. So, that also makes you as a manufacturer a lot more compelling than maybe your competitors to those key customers that you're trying to work with. But yeah, energy efficiency and renewable energy procurement are definitely the kind of next steps once you understand what the impact is.
Thank you so much. And this is a question for Tim. I would like to understand more about regenerative farming. My understanding is that animals are required as part of this ecosystem. So if the whole world went vegan, what would that mean? Great question.
Yeah, I was hoping that I wouldn't have to take Dale on and his comment earlier, but no, it's actually, there's a very, very valid point there that do we need livestock to have a regenerative system? And absolutely no, we don't. There's a wonderful example just down the road from me in Oxfordshire, a guy called Ian Tolhurst, who is an incredibly productive farmer, producing huge amounts of nutrition per acre without any livestock intervention. My concern is that A, we're not going to shift all our soils in the direction we need to fast enough through composting. B, you tell farmers that they've got to kill their livestock because we're all going wilding. I don't think it's going to go down very well, and the landscape would change overnight in a very different way. And also some land, like the prairies of America, have been formed over ruminant grazing for millennia before human intervention in the form of bison. And we're talking millions of bison here, building huge deep soils through the regeneration of grasses and their role in putting nutrient back into the soil. But you can't excuse the fact that livestock are responsible in huge parts of the destruction of vast swathes of South America, and indeed in the UK. There's huge destruction, and so it's not compulsory, but to see that transition, I don't want to see a whole load of glyphosate herbicide going out there to knock back cover crops to be able to get the next crop in. I'd much rather see a flock of sheep or cattle utilize that photosynthesis that's gone on and turn it into protein, and also harness. And if you look at the Rothamsted research, the best way to fix carbon in the soils, now taking emissions aside, is through dung. The animal ruminant takes out all the really available carbon, leaves all the more permanent carbon, and leaves it in the soil afterwards. And also seeding all that microbiology to enhance the microbiome. But there is also an emissions calculation to be had. So that's why I say, there's no one simple answer, but I don't think we should necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater, because in some systems, in some environments, livestock have a very valuable role in rebuilding soil condition and carbon.
Thank you so much, Tim. How are consumers' attitudes changing towards carbon? Is this a consumer trend? I don't know who would like to take that.
I can start at least. It's definitely a consumer trend, I think, across the globe. It's not evenly spread, but and it starts interestingly both rural and urban, and probably less suburban as far as I've seen from the stats. But consumers are becoming much more demanding of companies in tackling all challenges that we have at the moment, and obviously the climate and the carbon one is the most urgent one. I think yeah, there's lots of studies. I can draw them up and post them if that's helpful.
That would be super helpful. I mean, Dale, you started Ecotricity, I don't want to say 25 years ago, but I think it's 25 years ago. I mean, and you started this, through renewables. This was a conversation clearly 25 years ago. So can you talk a little bit more about how these consumer trends perhaps have been growing?
Yeah, surely it is 25 years ago, it's actually 26. So that's a long time ago. And at the time, it wasn't possible to buy green energy anywhere in the world. It was a new concept. And I won't describe how I came to that, because that's a long backstory. But I remember having a lot of conversations about it, meeting unremitting skepticism. Everybody said the same thing. What is it? And who wants it? And my answer in every case to the second question was, well, how can anybody know that they want it when it's not available? I'm going to make it available and make people want it. And I think that's the story of the last 25 years for me, not in green energy and not for me personally, but I mean generally. So if you fast forward to today, in the last 2 or 3 years, there's been an enormous rise, for example, in the availability of plant-based meals. They're in fast food outlets, in bakeries, in supermarkets, in motorway service stations. Everywhere you go, there's a plant-based option. And it's a positive feedback loop. The more companies have made them available, the more people have bought them. And the more they buy them, the more companies make them available, because they see the market, they feel the demand. It's positive feedback. You can look to electric cars as well. 10 years ago, you couldn't buy one. 10 years from now, you won't be able to buy anything but an electric car. That's an incredibly rapid transition, just 20 years. And so I think availability is the key, actually. Make it possible for people to have these things, because that's how they change how they live and reduce their own impact. And that's how we get on with it.
Thank you so much. And I love Michael's question. Sorry, Louise.
I was just going to jump in and say, and this is why innovators are so important, because innovators are the ones who dare to step into the white space. In previous careers, working for companies exactly that, like nobody's going to pay for this. And it used to be that the consumer said, oh yeah, I'll pay for it if it's green or whatever, but didn't really, because they didn't want to give up the convenience and the function. But now innovation has allowed us to produce superior products, really, that have lower carbon emissions, that are more sustainable, and hence the trend that Dale's talking to. So it's just here, this is the time of the innovator. Go for it.
Absolutely, I could not agree more with you. I've got a really great question from Michael. He's like, I'm so confused. Is livestock cattle positive or negative? Just a yes or no question, yes or no answer, please, somebody.
I'm going to say negative.
I'm going to say positive.
A healthy mixture of both.
Yeah, I was going to say, should we say in moderation then?
Let me just point out this statistic. 90% of all meat eaten in Britain is farmed indoors. It's not grazed. And the idea that we can graze a substantial amount of our meat intake in the future is a fallacy. We don't have enough land for that. That's why it's farmed indoors. So it could be a niche piece of the market, you know, for people that don't want to give up animals, but it's not the answer.
I think it needs to be, you know, magnitudes more expensive, and make it that niche where it shouldn't be eaten once a week, even potentially. You know, is that where we're at? But at the same time, you know, unless we have apex predators in the country in the form of wolves and lynx and so on, which unfortunately I think the UK is a little overpopulated for wolves. There's a role to play for some apex omnivores. And so to utilize that protein if it's available. But I agree with Dale, you know, so many of these livestock are farmed indoors, and until we get complete transparency and emissions data and so on, we can't really be saying that meat is or livestock are the answer to this, but they could be part of the tool in the transition, but nowhere near the numbers that we're farming them at the moment.
Do you know how many
1
cows
billion a
are...
year, by the way. Sorry.
Sorry, Dale.
I was going to give you that answer, actually, not cows, but in terms of creatures, it's 1 billion every year that we raise and kill in Britain. Just Britain is 70 to 80 billion worldwide. So 10 times the population of the planet every year.
And there's more biomass in livestock than there is in wild creatures now, I think, is also globally frightening.
Frightening. Okay, as a beauty brand, what sort of innovators could we collaborate with to help reduce our carbon? Who would like to take that?
Collaborate with us.
There's a big role to play for carbon fixation up the supply chain of fashion. A huge, you know, cotton is an incredibly destructive cropping in a non-regenerative way, but it can be regenerative, and therefore it can be fixing carbon. And so, yeah, look out for those opportunities.
Thank you. How can we manage CO2 reductions when we are about to produce twice more products? Know that we are already mainly using sustainable materials today and ship with a truck. Anyone?
Yeah, growth obviously throws a spanner into the mix of things. And that's why, you know, when you are a fast growing company, it's making sure that, you know, the emissions per product, per ton of product, however, you know, you measure your functional units, that is consistently going down. So the aim is that if you are a growing company, to not increase your emissions at all, but through, you know, reducing the relative intensity of all your products to keep that going down. So yeah, certainly it's not easy, especially if you kind of are already operating as a sustainable brand. But yeah, it's that really focusing on that intensity figure, and that's how, you know, you might choose to communicate what you're doing.
Thank you. Louise, you were going to say something.
I was going to add a little bit of radical, hopefully spice to Pauline's answer, which was perfect. But it was, if you are growing, invest in figuring out new ways of producing your products. You know, we've talked about innovation in theory, but this is exactly when you're growing, and yes, if you can keep or reduce the intensity per product, great, but you're still going to be sending more carbon into the air. So take a bit of time, and actually teams love this time. And if you're a growth company, you're doing well, you've got a good team, make them think through how to do this differently. You know, I really think it's an imperative, because even if it's hard, there are so many benefits for the team, for your business in the future, and for the rest of the world.
Yeah, and I think something to add to that as well is also business model innovation. I think, we're kidding ourselves, I think, if, by 2030, we produce as much as we do today, consume as much as we do, and kind of get rid of as much as we do. I think, that circularity is absolutely necessary for every company, whether large or small, to achieve its carbon goals. And a lot of that, aside from material innovation, transportation, all of that, a portion of those reductions are going to come from new ownership models. So rental, subscription, really, extending your customer relationship, beyond the first point of sale, but to the second or third, and being able to capture that value as a business. I think really, rethinking how consumers interact with these products is going to be a huge part of how we get to where we need to be.
Absolutely, and thank you very much for that. I mean, we actually wrote a report with Bain a couple of months ago, and set up as a company of the future. So it's called Luxco 2030, and basically 40% of revenue will come from exactly what you say: repairing, renting, leasing, reselling, etc. Not just from putting more products out in terms of new products out of to the marketplace. This is a question from Samantha. Is soy plantations not causing wide-scale deforestation? Which is the key elements of a vegan diet? Would this also be advised to avoid? Hard to know what is the right choice to make. Who would like to take that? Dale?
Yeah, I have to, don't I?
Dale is laughing.
Yeah, I'm laughing. This is one of those great big fat vegan myths, isn't it? I mean, you come across it all of the time. Vegan diets are destroying the rainforest, when in fact something like 90% of global soy is fed to animals to feed to humans. So it's actually the non-vegan diet that's destroying the Amazon, not the vegan diet.
Yeah, I'll just follow that up. Absolutely right. But also, it doesn't matter where it comes. It doesn't matter what you prescribe to in terms of diet. If you don't know where it's started its life, you're not sure how it was grown or produced, whether that's palm oil or soya or whatever it was, maize, the other side of the world, livestock. You've just got to try and understand that supply chain, and whether that means following, an organic mark will mean that it won't have come from an intensive system, whether that's vegetables or meat, broadly speaking. But as there's more spotlight on these systems and there's more exposure, so the requirements of certification become more stringent, or at least they should do, so that we can understand where our food comes from. And if in doubt, get it locally.
Thank you very much. What is your advice to get suppliers involved and engaged, especially as we're just starting to understand what our carbon footprint is as a business, and want them to get on board and help us to reduce the carbon emission on our operations? Well done, whoever posted that question. Who would like to answer this?
I can take it.
Thank
I can
you.
take it to start with. So yeah, well done. That's exactly what you need to do. And communicating it, I would suggest the first thing you do is you communicate. What are you trying to do? And you communicate the opportunity, both, again, internally, but also externally to suppliers and clients, and get them on board with the whole idea. Back in the day, I must have been 2007, 2008, I was working with for an American company, and we decided to try and convince our trucking company to have one biodiesel truck, because we were very, very small. And so we invested in our team of chemists and people to come in and help the company turn their normal truck that went across the US, and this was a big company. They said they'd do one for us, to biodiesel. Because then they could use that as an example for what they were doing, and in return, we got our products nicely on the side of them, and it benefited us. But invite your suppliers in, and figure out how can you help them, and they can help you for this common cause.
Thank you so much, Louise. And I cannot believe that somehow we managed to actually get to our 45 minutes. So I just want to thank you so much to all of you, like Louise, Pauline, Tim, and Dale, for your time, your thoughts, your energy, and your positivity, although the subject is very complex. and the simplicity of actually making this fun, at least for me. I hope everybody else has had some fun today. I pass this over to Claudia. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much for your time. Thank you all for joining us today. Please click the link in the chat box now to download your copy of the report, or head over to positiveluxury.com. And please, if you have any questions or feedback, email us at hello@positiveluxury.com. We want to hear from you. Thank you again for joining, and we hope to see you soon. Take care. Bye.